everyone. I'm Maria Raquel Bossi, Senior Director of Education and International Initiatives at Film Independent. We are a nonprofit film arts organization based in Los Angeles, with members worldwide. Our mission is to champion creative independence in visual storytelling and support a community of artists who embody diversity, innovation, and uniqueness of vision. Today, our good friend, Spirit Award-winning producer Karen Chen, who is also president of Degenerate, a North American distributor of independent Chinese cinema, has helped us bring together a group of esteemed producers from Los Angeles, Shanghai, and Hong Kong to shed some light on how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the industry in their respective countries and how going back to the new normal looks like for film production and exhibition. We have the benefit of a couple of people who are ahead of us in terms of this crisis. So here with us today, our producer, Peter Yam. He's a producer of documentaries such as Yellowing and Lost in Fumes. Liu Yingkao from Midnight Blur Films, Parallax Films. She's in Shanghai. Angela Chen Kaplan, president of Chen Kaplan Company, which is a literary management and production company here in Los Angeles. And Diana Williams, EVP of content at MWM in Los Angeles, should be joining us shortly. Karen will be leading this very important discussion. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you to the panelists for joining. We are truly spanning the globe because I'm coming to you from France. So I'm excited to speak with all of you. And, you know, this panel is curated around where you are geographically. I think each of us has something different to add about what's happening in our current spaces, physical, but also in our communities. We each work with in a slightly different area in the film industry. And I thought it would be really interesting to bring together these perspectives. You know, the shutdown has impacted the entire film ecosystem, the entire film supply chain, and it's impacted them in very different ways, I think. So I would love for this conversation to be wide-ranging, to talk about everything from development to production, to sales, to distribution. And each of you, I think, has a different point of view to offer the audience. And, you know, a lot of people are really interested in what's happening in China and also Hong Kong, because even in Europe, where I am, there are some Northern European countries like Sweden and Denmark and the Netherlands where filming is still continuing. So the US is further behind. And a lot of the Film Independent members are Los Angeles based, but based all around the States, and really looking at other countries at how are we going to move forward? How are we going to start making content again? And how are other people in other countries working through this time? So I would love to, you know, start with Peter in Hong Kong and also Liu Ying in Shanghai. And I want to ask you, you know, let's start with the big question on everyone's mind, which is production. You know, how do we get back into production? And we know that production, film production and commercial production has restarted in China. I believe it restarted last month. I've spoken to producers who are back in production in China. And, you know, Peter just told us that he's in the lobby of his office where they're screening. They're holding a screening right now in his office space. So there's some screening activity happening in Hong Kong, which is exciting. So I'd love to hear from you both first. You know, have you thought about going back into production? Have any of your projects gone back into production already? Are you making plans to, or have your colleagues gone back into production?
Well, in fact, I mean, I'm in Hong Kong. My project, that's one of my projects, Blue Island, is still in productions. Because of the raining seasons, we have to capture the landscape of the raining season. So we have to start shooting in April. I mean, during the time, we still have the quarantine going on. We still have many procedures have to go through with the authority if we want to continue the productions. So so between April and May, we have some productions still going on, but for some of my friends who are in film productions, most of it, especially for the commercial film, I mean, they are in jeopardies for sure, and many of those people are out of work, and so really looking for handouts in a way. I mean, but our government sort of come in and helping us along the way in a way, yeah. So yeah.
And Peter, can you
Yeah.
describe in Hong Kong, you are in a modified sort of quarantine, is that right? Like you're able to go to your office?
Yes, I'm able to work in my office, but I'm encouraged not to go to my office. We have sort of a 4 people working place sort of rules and guidelines. If you exist more than 4 people, you might be in troubles. So as you can imagine, for filming crew, I mean, there has to be much more than 4 people. So we have to talk to the police to get their permits for us to go shootings, especially for our production crews. But for the time being, we don't encounter any difficulties in applying and getting the permits from the police. So the production still goes on for sure. But for some of the development project, I mean, they are not, I don't think they, I mean, they are in a pause, you know, for sure. I mean, waiting for the pandemic or waiting for the virus to go away, maybe, you know, we'll see. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. And Lil Ying, you're both a sales agent. Actually, you're a sales agent, a producer, and a writer, a journalist. So you have quite a wide range of perspective. Tell us about what you see with production.
Actually, for my company, we were lucky enough to finish the shooting before Chinese Spring Festival, our latest production. So actually, during the period when the pandemic was most severe in China, we were kind of finding a way to do the post-production, which indeed created a lot of problems because the director, he was afraid of the pandemic, so he flew to Korea before that, and then but Korea now was like getting worse, and then he couldn't come back to China to talk to the post-production crew face to face. So it was a really time-consuming, energy-consuming process. But so the post-production was longer than we expected. So, and also lots of companies in Beijing were remained closed, and you could work from home, but you couldn't go to the office place. So it was really a tough period. I think from the middle of March, the situation was getting better and better. Most of the people could return to their office to work, but still, since the cinemas are now still closed in China, the situation is still not too clear. People are holding a kind of a positive attitude towards the near future, but since the market still closed and we don't know like what we can, like who we can talk to sell the film, or like what kind of distributor that who are both or is there any distributor who is bold enough to take more new films for the future distribution, we don't really know. And for me, since I'm also in charge of the international sales of Chinese films to the overseas markets, then, you know, since the pandemic is affecting the global now, then it's getting really, really hard for me to push, to promote the films. And we kind of get a very obvious no from all the film festivals, because they are also not sure about when they're going to happen. So it's a period of time full of uncertainty for us now. Yeah.
And I will come back to a much deeper conversation around sales and distribution, but I'm curious, is the lack of distribution possibility making producers reluctant to go into production, even though they can go into production now? Do you see this with your own projects or your colleagues?
Yeah, I think that's also happening here, because since now we are also developing other projects, we want to reach out to investors as much as possible. We can really detect a sense of reluctancy now. because no one really knows what's going to happen. Even the film is successfully produced and finished the post-production, if the market will be mature enough or ready enough to take more films. And also all the distributors, some of them directly told us that they're not looking for new titles now because they already have some titles at hand that are not able to distribute it right now. So they will deal with that first to see how it goes, and then come to more fresh titles after.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to go to Angela and Diana, who are both joining us from Los Angeles. And, you know, we know obviously that production is still shut down in Los Angeles and in the States for at least another month, right? If not more, most likely more. I want to ask both of you how the shutdown has impacted your work. You know, with the two of you, you work very much in development as well. I know you spend a lot of your time creatively developing projects, building IP, working with story builders. How has that changed for you? Is it more development than ever, or is there also these concerns? What are we writing? Who is the audience that's going to come out of this?
Should Maria go first? Do you want me to go first?
Please, Angela. Yes.
Okay. So live action production is closed, that is for sure. But one pipeline which is not closed is actually animation. So I feel that in my conversations over the past several weeks, people are still developing for live action, and production actually in animation continues. So people are looking ahead. We're getting offers in for productions in theater in December in London for the West End, but who knows honestly how long it's going to be. So I think that there's a lot of hope that, you know, there's going to be a certain amount of time where everything is going to be closed down and then things are going to open up again momentarily.
And Angela, you work with writers all across all across different medium, from animation, you said, to theater, and obviously film, live action. How are you seeing this impacting their work? You know, are you still selling material? Are they still pitching? Is the writing happening as much as before?
We're still selling. It remains to be seen. I mean, I think, you know, the projects that are in process for me right now, in terms of offers that are coming in, are either very, very big titles that I'm representing, or it's business actually that began before the pandemic. So it's not actually new business right now. We will see momentarily, you know, over the next few weeks as I take out new material, if there is still an appetite for new projects that don't have a lot of brand recognition. So that's the first thing. I would also say for in terms of impact in other areas, comic books, for example, I represent a number of comic book creators. And Diamond Distribution in particular is currently quiet. So that means all the comic book companies are not getting material, are not getting new comic books. That means the distributor is also not paying and not receiving new comic book titles. So that's impacted DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Boom, Image, all the big Dark Horse. It's impacted all the large comic book companies that publish.
And Diana, you work with a broad spectrum of creators across all media. How do you see this impacting? If you could talk about the different projects you have in process or what you're seeing.
So for my division, in which I'm working across, as Karen said, all mediums, I actually have, at this point, I'm not impacted because the way that I had been developing my slate, I was already looking at the WGA strike as being the thing that was actually going to hit me. And so I had been strategizing with my slate, in which I was focused on animation. So the first 4 projects were animation based. So I'm not feeling an impact. I probably won't feel an impact until like this time next year when my live action comes online. But we've been still able to keep moving forward because I am involved in publishing and podcasts and across the spectrum. As Angela said, I only had one project that got hit because of comic books. And that industry is really shut down because of what happened with Diamond, which basically Diamond has a monopoly. Diamond is the only distributor in comic books. And so once they halted all distribution, and then along with every state having a quarantine in terms of non-essential businesses shutting down, all the mom and pop shops also shut down. So even if Diamond was distributing, there's nowhere for Diamond to bring the books to. So that whole pipeline is shut down. And then Diamond also told all the publishers that they could not put their new titles up for digital distribution. So and I have a new title that's with IDW. So we're kind of stuck right now because even if we could have pivoted, we could have pivoted to digital distribution. Diamond has kind of cut off their legs and said that you cannot do that. So we're kind of caught on that one project with the comic book, but because we were in TV development on it, we're able to continue on with that. So we're trying to be as strategic as possible. Now, where the company is a little bit hit, at least with the film and TV side, they had 2 projects that had just finished filming. So they were able to quickly get everybody to figure out how to do remote post-production. So things are still humming along there, but we do have a very vibrant live theater division, which we were the producers of Hadestown and Inheritance. And so effectively theater is shut down now. And so it's about looking for what are going to possibly be new models for live entertainment, which also affects one of my divisions.
Thank you both. I mean, it's interesting because as a producers, you know, you understand that distribution has a direct impact on what gets financed, right? What does well in theaters impacts what gets financed. And right now we are seeing a complete supply chain impact from, you know, one point to the other like never before. If there was ever any doubt that that distribution impacted the very beginning of the supply chain, I feel like this moment has crushed that doubt. I mean, going back to theaters and screenings, you know, in Hong Kong and China, I'd like to go back to Peter and Neil Ying and just ask, you know, Peter, you said you are hosting a screening in your office right now. And we also saw in the news, you know, that Shanghai and other cities tried to reopen theaters and then, you know, the central government said no and shut them down. So what is the latest on that? What do you guys anticipate happening in the near future?
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm just holding a very small screening for couples of friends. I mean, for intimate friends to come over and watch some films together and talk about films. You know, we miss going to the cinema, but I don't see, at least in Hong Kong, that the theater is going back to normal, to full operations for the time being. Yeah. So for the time being, I think it's going to be very tough for a long time, and I don't see a short term anyway, you know, for films to be seen unless for streaming for sure. I mean, it is time for streaming, I think, and we have to look into that. I mean, I'm not very familiar with that platform yet. I'm more a cinema guy, and so yeah. There's much to learn, I think, for me. Yeah.
Peter, how have you seen film festivals in Hong Kong respond? Have film festivals gone online?
Yes, the Hong Kong International Film Festival has been postponed to August. But of course, if they will resume, you know, for the time being, there is a film mark, you know, going on with the International Film Festival during the time. It should start in March, end of March to April, but they postponed to August. But I think if they want to proceed to, you know, to delay to August, you know, they have to start working in May. But I don't think, you know, the situation is going to sort out in May. So I think there's a big chance the festival is going to cancel. It's my opinion. It's just my take on the situations. So for the time being, for film festivals in Hong Kong, I think we're looking for another way, streaming for sure. Maybe, you know, yeah.
Thank you. And Neil Ying, what are you seeing in Shanghai?
Actually, yeah, the reopening of the cinema is a bit tricky because, yeah, at the end of March, we heard the news that the cinema is going to be reopened, and also like the first batch of the films already posted on social media, and people are saying like classic Hollywood or classic Western films like Inception or Harry Potter series will be screened in cinemas for the first run or something like that. But right after, right before the cinema was supposed to officially open, then there was another news saying that okay, the government wanted to shut them down for the fear of the spread of the virus and so and so. But people really understood that, so we waited for more, like a couple of more weeks. But now, since the restaurants and even like discos and party venues were already reopened, cinemas, like for the cinemas, we still don't have any clearer indications. So people were kind of asking questions: why can't cinema be reopened? And how can cinemas be more dangerous than like partying together? And now we can really observe the articles written by like cinema managers and people who actually run the cinema to ask for an argument or a reason for doing that, or they want cinema to be reopened because now they're having a really tough time. They kind of switched themselves to other jobs, like selling things and doing other other sidebar works. But so they're really having, they can't really anticipate when would the exact date be. So for us, we also don't know. And even the date of the reopening of the cinema settled, then I don't think the Chinese, like all the Chinese films, would be bold enough to be the first ones to put themselves into the cinema. They want to observe for a little period of time. Yeah, so it's still very unclear at the moment. Even our daily life is resumed to normal, but for the distribution side, it's still very unclear.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm curious. This is a question for all of you. You know, how you think that international markets will be impacted, and obviously that's a different answer for the different markets, right? We've talked about animation and remote post-production. The remote post-production companies, I think, are doing well right now, but there are certain fields in our broad spectrum of media that are succeeding, that are growing at the moment. And there are others, Liu Ying, I think you really mapped out very clearly the concerns. Like right now in the States, a lot of people the one question we keep asking is, when will production open? But there's so many other questions after that. Well, once production opens, are producers going to move forward with those productions? Because will the theaters be open? Will the rest of the supply chain be open, right? And this obviously applies to live theater as well. So I'm curious what you guys are seeing in terms of the impact on sales that might be happening at the moment, sales to come, whether that's a pitch or, that's a, finished product.
Well, what I'm seeing right now actually is people are really paying attention to which countries are impacted by quarantines and which countries are opening up. And, I've heard executives at studios say, when they had to shut down production, they started to pay attention to the number of cases in certain countries, and just sort of tracking that timeline. Because if, for example, New Zealand is opening, right? Germany is opening. Austria, I think, is also opening. The Netherlands, Sweden hasn't really, their policy is very different from ours. And so they're starting to look at those countries that are opening up to see whether or not they can pick up production in those countries. So what that might mean is, if a production is moved to that country, they will quarantine possibly for 2 weeks and then start production in that regard, which is insane, which is, it's very hopeful, because every single day, that a studio is shut down and a production can't move forward, it's a ton of money lost. So I think that they're trying to figure out how they can continue. They can't fire actors. If they fire actors, actors are then available to go off and do other projects. So they have to figure out sort of legally how to retain actors still for production. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think to add to that also is that we keep talking about production, but what's going to happen for anything, like let's look at Georgia. So it's a big production base here in the United States. Pretty much everything shoots there. But Georgia's reopening. It's already been seen as some place that's going to have the highest impact in terms of what the devastation is going to be from the pandemic. And so if productions are still planning to be there, it's also on the assumption that people are going to want to get on airplanes. So it's not about also where something is shooting. It's like, how are people getting there? So even outside the quarantine, am I going to get on a plane? And so we know that we're going to have a lot of actors going to say, no way, no day. A lot of crews going to say that. And so I'm looking at what the impact's going to be on Los Angeles. Does that mean Los Angeles is going to have an increase in productions? If so, we don't have the stage space. How are we supposed to handle the production? Permitting here is ridiculous. There's still so many counties and cities that will not allow film shoots. And do we have enough of the crew to be able to sustain a lot of production? So I think to your point, Karen, it's like, if we have to ask all the questions around the main question. It just can't be, will production open back up? It's everything else that feeds into it. If economically we're having so many problems, so many mom and pop shops are shut down, and so the support that has to go into productions, what's going to happen with them if they're shut down? Do we have SBA loans and micro loans for companies that have to then front getting in equipment until the productions get going on again? Now that's been depleted as well. So I think it's all the other questions that I've been thinking about, just because, again, if I'm looking at, specific to only my slate, if I'm looking at somehow maybe getting into production in the first quarter of 2021, I will be severely impacted by the figuring out of things in the fall and winter of 2020. So I think if we don't start asking all the questions beyond just when's production starting up again, I think we're going to each time be stopped and stopped and stopped.
Li-Ying and Peter, do you want to add anything to that?
For me, I think, yeah, for the production side, we're already seeing much like difficulties. And for me, I also want to add one more thing from like sales aspect maybe, because since we are a Chinese company, and nowadays, even we don't acquire foreign titles, we are not Chinese distributor for foreign titles. But actually nowadays, I receive tons of emails from foreign sales agents saying that, hey, we have this kind of, we have this and this titles in our library, and this is our titles available for China now. So would you please take a look at it and to see if you're interested in distributing it. So I can really sense the, it's not despair, but like sense an urgent, like a very urgent mentality to make money as much as possible from the past treasures of each company, and to see if they can have a chance in Chinese market, because probably we are going to be one of the first markets like open up in the near future. And now also the online streaming and online film viewing activities are very active in China. We can see all those copyright holders, they are developing their own platforms and apps, or even they collaborate with big streaming platforms in China to hold this collective film viewing, online collective film viewing experience activities. And they will invite like guest speakers and directors to have Q&A, online Q&A with the audience. So those companies are really creating a animated atmosphere for online film viewing, and they are also spending tons of money acquiring new titles or even older titles to enrich their library. So there might be a chance for foreign sales agents to to push to further promote their films in the Chinese market.
I'm sorry, what is the question again?
Peter, the question is, do you see this, or have you seen any impact already, in terms of sales, markets, whether it's taking you have documentaries that are finished and in the sales process, you have documentaries that are in the post-production process. How do you feel like that will be impacted?
Well, yes. Yes, for Hong Kong films, because we, especially some of my films, we have, the Chinese market may be reluctant to show some of my projects because there are some concerns about the subject matters, they're more sensitive. So we relied on for the international markets for sure. And one thing is we have to go to Europe and go to US in order to talk to you guys and let you know about our projects and this thing's coming in. And so, so we have to do it this way. And it's a learning process for us for sure. I don't know. It's much better to see people face to face and talk to each other and updating the process. And currently I'm working with a Japanese co-producers and in doing so, doing the online talking is not very satisfactory in a way, because it is much better to talk face to face about contract, about co-producing work. But so this is the card we get to deal with, and so we have to solve the situation, and for sure we will take it as an opportunity to grow and to to get accustomed to, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. We have about 10 more minutes. So, we have a very small select audience that's joined us for this live. And I want to encourage them to type in any questions you have into the Q&A section. I'm going to ask one more question and then see if there's any Q&A that we want to address. It's funny, Peter, when you opened up by saying you're hosting a very small screening for just a couple friends so you could watch a film and get together and talk about it. I had a physical yearning for that experience. It's something that I deeply miss already. I want to ask you guys, and this is a big question, but there's been a lot of talk about how this is an opportunity for transformation, for us to change, for us not to go back to the old normal, and this crisis is laying bare a lot of the disparities in America, absolutely, that we've seen historically and currently. What have you thought about this? Have you spent time imagining the future? What do you feel could be the best change, or maybe just the one change that you hope can come out of this? And that's for all our panelists, what is the one change that you hope can come out of this?
Well, I'll just start by saying that at the very beginning of the Safer at Home order that Mayor Garcetti put in place, I said to the people in my office, I said, we should really pay attention to how we work. And whether or not there are some really good best practices that come from having to stagger our hours in the workplace, meaning not more than one person can be at the office at any moment, and also working from home. And I said, let's pay attention because, Los Angeles is so enormous. You can't get anywhere without needing to spend at least 30 minutes in the car. So from a very, very sort of micro level, we're really examining, how we work. Our day-to-day work practice, whether or not, we can do everything remotely from home or as much of it from home to cut down on that. So, I'm hopeful that, at least in Los Angeles, there's going to be an impact in terms of we don't need to drive nearly as much So there's going to be a quality of life impact, at least for the people that I'm working with. And, certainly that's going to lead to, some sort of adjustment in terms of the speed of climate change.
I could say for myself, and this is quite selfish, but because of my model, which has always been about looking at story as it spreads across all platforms, from the time when I was a producer to also when I was at Lucasfilm and then now at Madison Wells Media, that it has already started a lot of the buyers changing their minds around the way they're looking at franchises. And I've gotten like a 500% increase now in calls on my projects because they have to try to find efficiencies in what they're buying, and considering now that every more so I think I think it's always been, look at CJ Entertainment in Korea, there's always been conglomerates, and now there's been more so in the United States, especially between Warner Media and Universal and NBC, and everyone now has all these different what have been siloed lines of businesses that they now have to figure out how to get everybody moving in the same direction on the same projects. And so I've been brought in actually on full on having almost classes with execs to talk about how to work on a franchise together as opposed to working against each other. And so I think, one of the outcomes I think from this is for those companies that are able to think in that way and think in franchise, that change has now made my model a bit more understandable and if anything, a lot more attractive. So I think that's the one outcome, because I think it becomes, to Angela's point, it's about efficiencies. We're trying to find where can this industry get a bit more efficient and not rely on the way things have been done back in, honestly, I think things have not changed in a lot of companies since the 70s. So I think everyone's relooking at their accounting practices. I think they're relooking at where their bloat is in the middle. I think they're rethinking the ideas of using more consultants or freelancers as opposed to having staff on all the time, which is an insurance cost. And that's a little scary, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who don't have jobs to come back to. And I think that's sad, but I think that's what's going to happen.
For me, I have maybe two hopes. One is from the professional, in the professional aspect. I really wish that the diversity of distribution can be somehow, to some extent, achieved after this pandemic, because now we really detected the people are craving for content, and they are craving to find new content online to kill that time at the first place. And I think that might be a chance for small budget or art house cinemas to find more channels to the audience. Since today, just now, American distributor who only did mobile streaming contacted me and said that okay, now before the pandemic, they were only looking for the Chinese titles with Dragon that had passed the censorship, and now they don't care anymore. So it means I can also sell my content. Some of them have not passed the censorship to them. I think that might be a chance. So that's my hope for the professional aspect. And for the more general and universal aspect, it would be people becoming realized how deeply we're connected to each other. Because for some Chinese people that I know, we don't really care what's going on in the outside world, and because China is so big, and our daily life can be self-sufficient to some extent. We are completely shut down, but we don't feel any difference. We can still walk on the street of Shanghai without knowing what's going on in the outside world. But I really hope that this pandemic can change this mentality a bit, to make people think we are actually connected. We can't survive without each other. So that would be a more general hope.
Thank you.
Very good answers. Yeah, that's very good answers. I like her answers. Yeah, I mean, small productions, maybe our, maybe, maybe smaller crews and small production, that sort of things may come out, yeah, maybe that's a good thing. I mean, this we may take the, yeah.
Thank you guys for that. That's no, it's great to hear. I mean, you each occupy such different spaces and different perspectives. We have a couple questions that I would love to throw at you. You know, we have a few film independent fellows who are joining from the Middle East. So we have a question on development and question on production. So I'm going to start with the development questions. And the first one comes from, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but it's Malak Mansoura. And they, this person is a producer in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and they're working on their projects. They have several scripts ready. Do you have any advice for pitching in these conditions? And Josh has a kind of ancillary question to that, which is on the development side, have you guys already started seeing any stories or projects being pitched that deal directly with COVID? So any advice on pitching in these conditions, and are you already seeing COVID stories being pitched? Angela, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, yeah, I would say regarding pitching, I know that unless there is a very big package that's put together, a lot of producers are keeping their powder dry, meaning they're not taking projects out right now. They're just trying to wait things out. So, a big package means a big actor attachment, because truthfully, actors are sitting at home right now. They're not able to do work, right? So the access that we have to actors for casting for animation is kind of unbelievable right now in terms of the people who are raising their hands, who are excited about being a part of a project. They're saying yes. So, we're looking for packages for directors, if an actor comes on, if a director comes on, all of a sudden, if it's an undeniable package, meaning, when production can start again, when filming can start again, people can move forward. So that's what I'm seeing. I mean, interestingly, even the application of force majeure has been really uneven across our business. So if I have a number of projects at a particular studio, that particular studio will be very selective in terms of which projects they want to force majeure in order for them to wait until after the restrictions lift and they can pitch again and sell again.
I think from my end, in terms of pitching, I just did 2 pitches. I think that because we're going remote and it's via Zoom and all this sort of stuff, that there's a bit, depending upon the type of project, there's a bit more of a need for some visuals, because it's something that can be sent ahead of time, especially if, like, I personally am not good in front of a camera. Like, this is not my world. So having some sort of materials, whether it's a deck that has a visual to it, that has some art, that is helpful in the process, because it gives somebody else also a thing to look at, because they're probably also as nervous in front of the camera. So I think that has changed pitching a bit. But I think everyone's still so wondering, again, speaking only from the United States side, I think a lot of people are still so wondering what's going to be the next drop, that they're just not sure about. If they listen to a pitch, can they even buy the pitch? They buy the pitch, what does that mean? I mean, it's money sitting around on the books because you can't do anything with it, because if production does start back up, again, it goes back to that whole question of what happens after the first question. So that's how I'm looking at pitching. In terms of getting in a bunch of COVID pitches, people have been talking about it. And I think me personally and some of my colleagues, we're not looking at anything that involves anything in this period, because I think what people aren't grasping are the number of people who have been so directly affected by COVID. And so then to put out a project that is around that, I think it is going to be a pretty big wound. And I don't know how that would be received by an audience. If we pull on that thread, it's a little bit less about, it should be less about the buyer and then the market, the making of it, and then the post-production, and then the marketing. It should be about when will the consumer be ready to see fiction stories around this?
Would this be considered apocalyptic genre-wise? Would this be considered apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic is the bigger question.
Yeah,
we may need 20 years and then we'll have to make something like Chernobyl.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's just something because it's so scary and so real. Like I think we're all fine with zombies, but this is just something else. And I think, you know, I'm curious because I really want to find out how Contagion is doing now. If it's still like,
Oh, it's doing great. Hot Zone is doing
actually,
great.
Once it started becoming a bit more real, at the first 2 weeks, it did really well. But
Right.
as more and more people were affected by COVID who started having deaths in their family, it actually, their numbers have
Interesting.
plummeted. Yeah.
Lil Ying, were you going to add something too?
Yeah, for the pigeons actually, because we have a project trying to looking for European co-producers. We are sort of doing our pigeon right now, but only on a very easy, only doing it like by sending scripts. I think it's a great time for the potential co-producers to really spend their time to read the script. But I cannot guarantee that any result will come out of that because I mean they're also very reluctant to take any like international co-production projects right now. And also for the COVID-related projects, yes, I've been actually there was a Spanish filmmaker reached out to me saying that he's now going to put up with a documentary series. That will be like 12 directors from 12 countries shooting like short documentary films about what's going on all over the world. And he has a great idea. I mean, we are still looking for more participants in that. I'm just helping out. And I tried to reach to some Chinese documentary filmmakers and ask about their interests. But I think it's sort of hard to put everything into places right now because also the financing part is not clear and what will be the future distribution. Then we come back again to this kind of questions. But I think also like shooting documentary films or even just like take your camera and record what's going on around you is sort of important, and it can be like the witness of the time. So I would see what I can do for these projects. Yeah, that's the most recent COVID-related projects that I deal with. But actually now Chinese government is really encouraging this kind of stories, and they want people to create relevant content, but who knows how many mainstream productions will come out of this.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question from the Q&A, and this is from Arij Mahmood, and this is a question about production. Well, I guess actually about audience. Do you predict a change in the demand between production value versus story because of the way production has to change due to social distancing and the coming recession? So I think what this question means is, do you see audiences being more open to lower production values? You know, productions or content that is made, you know, with smaller crews, with home videos, actually a little bit like what you just talked about, Neil Ying, and Peter, what you talked about too, you know, maybe smaller crews is a better thing. It doesn't necessarily mean lesser production value, but do you see that acceptance coming?
Well, I think given how many hours I spend on TikTok every day watching, the answer is yes. I'm kidding, but not really.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think people are starting to find other types of frames to be acceptable. And I think and also depending upon like what the household looks like, if it's a household that only has one big TV and everybody else has to be either on their laptops or on their mobiles, I'm wondering if that's starting to increase a different type of habit and behavior in people that maybe would not have used their mobile or used their laptop to watch something. So I think that also could potentially change the production value, quote unquote. you know, what is it going to mean to do like big Marvel-y type movies that go to this this screen.
Peter and Nilene, do
Oh.
you want to add any last thoughts or last words?
I don't have, I totally agree that they will change. I mean, short videos are so popular here, and I think it's like overwhelmingly popular outside China also. So yeah.
I mean, well, we're in the productions right now. We did auditions in during March, and 60 people's coming in, and we did increase our awareness of, you know, everyone have to wash their hands and you know, coming in and wearing the face mask and everything. And so we always ask ourselves the question, who is the essential crew that has to be there? And for sure, it's going to change how we do the productions. You know, we always ask who has to be there and who doesn't have to show up, for sure. So I think it's going to change us for sure. Yeah.
Well, a whole big unknown future ahead of us, but we all have a role to play in shaping it. So I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your morning and your evening for joining us. It's been such an interesting and different kind of conversation, and I really appreciate having this more global exchange. So thank you to Film Independent. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nilene. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Diana. And stay safe and take care, guys.
Yeah, stay safe.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you,
Take
Karen.
care.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Bye.
Bye.